Everyone, we are back. It's phenomenal to be able to conduct these video logs and to send them out to our congregation. As you can see, today I have a very special guest, someone you may have seen in synagogue, particularly last year for the high holidays and other times. Marsha Cohodes is married to Dr. Goldstein with two E's at the end, which is an interesting spelling, right? She's
Yes,
the mother of three and a phenomenal, vibrant individual who I thought was worthwhile for us to get to know. First, Marsha, thanks for agreeing to be with us. You are the first woman in our series, and that's just by sheer accident. I didn't make a selection based on gender, but couldn't be anyone better than yourself. And I hope that in the few minutes that we have together, everybody will get to know you, not as much, but even maybe better than I know you right now. So good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. As I said, when you emailed me, I am truly honored that you would be interested in knowing more about me, and I'm delighted we have a few moments in the middle of this pandemic to have a conversation.
That's wonderful. Through you, we're also going to get to know your family and a little bit of history, which, talking about history, I always start with my guests, asking them to tell us a little bit of who they are, where they come from, and so on. And why don't you do the same for us?
Okay, well, I am the granddaughter of three immigrants. My mom's parents, Isidore Weinstein and Bessie Horwitz, both came from Russia. My grandpa Isidore immigrated in 1881 at the age of 6 with a younger brother, 2 older sisters, and parents, and they settled in what is now a first-ring suburb of Minneapolis on a dairy farm. My grandma, 1911 at the age of 19 with 4 younger sisters and her parents. My grandparents were married a year later, and they spent their entire lives in Minneapolis. It's where my mother and her 3 sisters were born and raised. On my dad's side, my Zadie Mose Aaron Cohodes, who I'm named after, he passed away the year before I was born, came from a little shtetl outside of Vilnius, Lithuania, with 8 siblings, parents, aunts, uncles, and a slew of cousins, and they all came through Ellis Island and settled in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. My bubby, Julia Kaplan, was the only one born in the United States. She was born in Indiana after they got married. My bubby and Zadie raised my dad, his 3 younger brothers, in Iron Mountain, Michigan. So that was that generation. My dad went to the University of Michigan, graduated Michigan law in 1940, was shipped off overseas because of World War II. And when he returned, he moved to Chicago and started practicing law. My mother and her 3 sisters, born and raised in Minneapolis. My mom went to the University of Minnesota, and while she was a student, she worked for my grandfather, helping him in his drugstore chain and doing management and accounting and other things. But she really wanted a career, and her career was being the head buyer for cosmetics, main floor cosmetics at Young Quinlan Rothschild department store. And it was sort of like the Neiman Marcus of Minneapolis. And she wore a suit, hat, gloves, carried a briefcase, and this is 1940s. I mean, she had a career, and that's what she wanted to do. So my parents actually met on a blind date. A cousin of my mother's called her and said, "Edie, there's this nice fellow, just got out of the service, wants to meet a nice gal. He's a cousin of my wife's, and I think that he's around your age. Can you see if you have somebody you might want to fix him up with? He's coming up from Chicago to Minneapolis." So my mother said, "Oh, what's his name?" "Haskell Cohodes." She said, "I'll see what I can do." So she turns to my grandmother and said, "Mom, who's going to go out with a guy named Haskell Cohodes?" And she looked at my mom, and without missing a beat, she said, No, it's a free dinner. Go. So my mom went out on this date. 4 days later, they're engaged. 5 months later, they're married. And 9 months and 5 days later, my older sister, Sandy Elvishon, was born in Chicago. So my parents lived in Chicago till Sandy was about 5. They moved to North Dakota because my dad was offered a job managing department stores. And it was an opportunity to try something new. And I was born in Bismarck, North Dakota. That's little known. I'm a prairie girl. And they lived there till, I don't remember the move to Minneapolis, but I think I was probably a toddler. My father made a decision that he needed his daughters to grow up in a vibrant Jewish community. He grew up in this little town in Michigan, and all the Jews were probably related to him. And he wanted his daughters to have that opportunity to have a connection. So they moved to Minneapolis. My dad went into business with my uncle in the wholesale jewelry business. They joined Adath Yeshurun Synagogue, which is where I was consecrated when I was 5, where I had my bat mitzvah, where David and I got married. It's where I met in preschool in the 50s, my very, very closest friend, Joni Sussman. And she's my best friend still. And it's where I said Kaddish when my father died at Morning Minyan for 11 months. And I just have memories of that connection. And, my dad made a good decision, get to Minneapolis.
It certainly sounds like it. And it's also an incredibly American story. Most people I have met in my career, although they're also children of immigrants, they don't have the variation or the variety of places that I would call out of the way as you do. Yes, many moved around the country, but yours really is a Midwestern, very American story. How do you think that's shaped who you are?
Well, I think it has definitely shaped who I am. And people who grew up in the Midwest have that similarity. It's very different from growing up on the East Coast or the West Coast of the US. But I think Minneapolis is unique, and anyone who grew up there would understand it. People who relocate there that didn't grow up there, even in the Jewish community, find it absolutely amazing how close-knit the community is. So, my mother knew everyone. She grew up in North Minneapolis, and it's like she knows everyone. Even my daughter, Rebecca, said, I would say, it's a small world. This one knows this one, this one's connected to that one. She'd say, no, Ima, it's not a small world. You just know everyone. So people tend to grow up in Minneapolis. Maybe they leave to go away to school or for a job, but so many come back in the community. One of the things I love about Naples is that a lot of my Minneapolis Jewish community winters here, and several are members of Beth Tikva. So
correct. I think I've sensed that connection among all of you guys who come from the Midwest. Not only the sense of knowing each other and so on, and the closeness that you all have to each other, but there is a different personality, a different character, much more down to earth, more about getting things done than talking about how to get things done. And I think that's a trait that you very much embody, because I know that if I ask you to do something, you don't just say yes and get it done, but you always do it with perfection and excellence. Tell us how that's helped you through life.
Well, I was raised by an incredible woman, Edith Cohodes, and she was my mentor in this, and she is really, if you ask my hero, she was my hero. She was the queen of Tikkun Olam. So I learned a lot about taking on a responsibility and getting it done and doing it well by example. And I watched my mother. I think a couple of things that I could use as an example. When I was young, elementary school, I was a school patrol. and the people who walked to school would go home for lunch, and I would stand there with the orange flag on a 70-mile-an-hour highway, push the button, hope the cars would stop, and help the walkers go home for lunch. And my mother went to the city hall and said, "This is ridiculous. You need a pedestrian bridge." And they said, "Costs too much money." She said, "Well, can I take it to the city council?" She wasn't afraid of anything. She wanted to get something done. And they said, "Well, you bring 5,000 signatures and we'll consider it." And my mother got a whole team together of moms to go door to door. And she walked in with 5,000 signatures and she said, "I want that pedestrian bridge. Now do it. I did what you asked me to do." And it's still there. The school is now lofts, it's not a school anymore, but that pedestrian bridge is still over the highway. A great example is my mother was very involved in Sisterhood at Ada in Minneapolis, and they couldn't find anyone to take over Torah Fund. Well, you went to JTS. Torah Fund is the year-long fundraiser
Of course.
for JTS. And so the Edie, will you take this on? Fine. All of a sudden, she's getting accolades. And JTS is going, wow, great numbers. So I'm reading these letters. I go, "Mom, what are you doing?" She said, "Well, I have to tell you something. When you ask for a donation, you need to make a connection. So when you make a connection with someone, they are appreciative and absolutely willing to make a donation and thank you for it." I said, "So how do you do that?" So my mother would get the paper in the morning, open up to the obituaries, find all the Jewish names, and she knew everyone in Minneapolis. And she'd look at who was survived, and she'd pick up the phone and start calling all the women she knew. She'd say, "Oh, did you hear so-and-so passed away? Oh, yeah. How about I send a Torah Fund card for you? I'll make the donation. I'll send you an envelope, put it in the envelope. It'll have a stamp on it. Mail me the check." And she made thousands of dollars by doing it this way. But she was determined, and she wanted to figure out the way to get it done and to do it well. It wasn't just managing.
What a beautiful story. And I have to thank you, because when I arrived in New York in 1978, my first home was the Matilda Schechter Residence Hall, which indeed was purchased, furnished, and maintained with Torah Fund monies. At the time, I was also very, very sexy because I was the only Latino student at the seminary.
Yeah.
So they brought a lot of the ladies from all over the country to visit, and I was the tour guide with my Colombian accent, and it was very funny. We're not supposed to get paid, but I always came back and had dollar bills in my pocket. The ladies would always stuff dollar bills as a tip in my pocket. I don't know when your mom passed, but it's possible I met her at some time along the hundreds and hundreds of ladies that came to see the work that they had done to furnish and support the students at JTS. So I thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, she
I know that you've also been involved with Federation. If I'm not wrong, you're a life member of the Line of Judah and so on. Tell us more about that.
So I wasn't really involved in Federation growing up in Minneapolis, but when I returned back in 82 and took a job with an investment banking house at the time, when I went to security school to study for my securities boards, I ran into a classmate from high school, and we stayed in touch. We studied together for a while. He was working for a different investment house. He called me about a year later and said, "I want to talk to you about young leadership development. Are you familiar with it?" "No." "So let's meet for coffee." So Ken and I met for coffee, and he said, "Young leadership development is part of the Federation, and this is set up to expose and educate the young Jewish population of adults about all of the beneficiary agencies under the Federation umbrella." So David ended up joining me. We weren't married yet. We were dating, and something we could do together. So we had a year of young leadership development, and we were guided to areas of interest in the community. David was guided to Jewish Family Children's Service, and was the first president of Jewish Vocational Service. I was guided, because of my profession, to community housing, which built and managed real estate, housing for seniors who needed assistance, financial assistance. And that was my introduction, was joining the Community Housing Board. But from there, I started getting involved in Federation and at the time, the Women's Professional Division of Federation, and became a campaign chair for a year during Exodus 1 from the Soviet Union. So it was a two-line campaign. And through that, I met a lot of the people in the community who were also involved in Federation. David and I were invited to become fellows of the Wexner Foundation in '85. And in '86, we did 2 years of that, which was wonderful leadership training and study together. And from that point, I became a Lion of Judah and became more involved in campaign. I joined the Women's Young Leadership Council, and together I met other Wexner Heritage graduates, other Lions of Judah, and it takes me all the way to today, where I'm on the National Women's Philanthropy Board. We just had our annual spring meeting via Zoom, 103 women from around the country, and it was fabulous. We get together on Mondays. Any Monday you can hop on as a member of the board, and we talk to each other, and we hear about interesting things happen, and we learn together. And through Federation, I've made wonderful friends. And
well, I assume these meetings have helped you cope a little bit with everything that's going on now. Also, the fact that you have your kids with you is a great blessing, and not all of us have that ability to have them. How have you guys coped with the virus, the pandemic, the sequestration, and everything? You guys are so vibrant and so full of energy. I don't know how it's contained within four walls.
I think it's challenging for everyone, and it is a pandemic after all, and you can't predict something like this. It always can take us by surprise. Our lives have been, for the last few years, David's and mine, a life of David getting up, working out, showering, and going to his home office. So that part hasn't changed. So for him, it's kind of the same. Everything else going on outside is different. Our older son, Avi, as you know, has been living with us since he finished college last spring in Chicago. And our daughter, Rebecca, came to visit us from Los Angeles at our place in Mexico, March 11th, and is still with us. We returned just before Pesach here. So I think that the key, at least for me, is making sure that I take care of myself physically and emotionally and mentally. And I know that I have shpilkas first thing in the morning. I need to work off something. So whether I run here in the Pelican Marsh community or go for a long, hearty walk, I need to do something physical. And that kind of brings my shpilka level back to normal. And I also, I stay connected with people. I'm really big on connections and reconnecting with people that I haven't talked to for a while, either by phone, by FaceTime, by Zoom. And I also listen to a lot on audiobooks. So, whatever I'm doing, I can be sitting, I can be doing laundry, I can be making dinner, whatever. I keep my head and my body moving, and that makes me better for my family.
Right. What would you say is a very positive outcome about this whole situation? What is it that you can appreciate what seems to be hopefully getting closer to the end of the pandemic, at least a first stage of it?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that I've been reflecting on. the silver lining for us is having our daughter with us. She's been living in Los Angeles, so to have her with us is great, and to watch her and our son interacting after so many years of leading different lives has really been beautiful, a beautiful thing to watch. I also, on that 10,000 foot level, am so impressed with people's resilience. I don't know if I could do what young parents with children suddenly home while they're working from home and trying to set up all of the platforms for their children to continue being educated while they're trying to continue doing their jobs. It is, it's part of the silver lining. We are resilient as a community, as a country, and as a Jewish community. I mean, the Wexner Foundation twice a week you can come in on a Zoom platform and learn and have a discussion about something. Mm-hmm. Last week we had the director of, the medical director of all of the equipment that's needed in a pandemic, the PPE equipment, from Rabin Hospital in Israel, zooming in and telling us the story of what it was like for her to usher the very first COVID-19 patient into the hospital in Israel.
Right.
And what she's been doing to prepare.
How do you see the world after all of this is said and done?
I hope that the world doesn't go back completely to the way it was before. I know everyone's thinking, when will we be able to do this again and that again? I hope that this time has given us a pause as humanity, and we stop and have some gratitude, smell the roses, and be thankful for what we do have, and take advantage of this opportunity to connect and reconnect with people living in isolation, as we have been for so many weeks now, and take that to whatever is next.
That's wonderful. And I see that you are a person that does homework. I sent you a few questions and you knew I was going to ask you about gratitude and things that you would be grateful for. And I am so thankful to you to have done that. I think that you are truly an example for many. We have not spoken about the challenges of raising a son with special needs and so on, but I can attest to the fact that you have done a magnificent job, not just for him, but you have invested your talents, your energy, your purse on behalf of others in situations like that. But I think that's a subject for a different conversation that perhaps you and I may want to share with others. I'm going to ask you to leave us with one lingering thought, if you don't mind, before we sign off, so that people can write to me in their emails. Boy, that lady really is impressive, and I love what she had to say. And when I come back to shul, I'm going to look to meet her. Hopefully they will be able to either shake your hand or hug you and feel the great admiration that I feel for you.
Wow, it's a loaded question. I would say, you mentioned Avi, our son with autism, and what I learned from him is greater than what I've taught him, I feel sometimes. And what he taught me is that no matter what I plan and how I want to orchestrate something, they say, there's a saying, mankind plans and God laughs, that I'm not in charge of the future. I can plan very well. I think I'm very organized, but I have to be prepared for something to be different than how I planned it. So in the midst of a pandemic, none of us planned this. And what I would like to leave everyone with is the hope that we move forward with the glass isn't always full, but at least it's half full. And that we take the lessons and the positives that we've seen through this experience to the next level in whatever happens next. And like Avi has taught me, it's important that you're happy. It's important that you're healthy. It's important that you have friends and that you take the time to nurture those relationships, because the bottom line is not what Ivy League school you're going to get into. It's the relationships you have with people.
Well, thank you. And, together right now, we're trying to build greater connections to everyone in our greater Beth Tikva family. I thank you for taking the time to spend a little, 45 minutes with me. I know your daughter helped you set up the technology, and I thank her for that. Sometimes I have to be producer and technician. Today I had help, and that's a phenomenal thing. Please convey my best wishes to the entire family. Today is Yom Yerushalayim, and they say that we have to always keep Jerusalem at top of our mind in the happy and in the sad occasions. And so today we do the same. We are aware that it's Yom Yerushalayim, and in a few days will be Shavuot, the time where once again we recommit not only to the Torah and the tradition, but as you just pointed out, it should also be a time that we can recommit and reconnect with one another. And that's a blessing that I wish for you, for everyone who's listening to us. And I wish you all a Chag Sameach and a very, very joyful return to some kind of normalcy as the summer months arrive. Thank you again, Marcia. It's lovely to have had an opportunity to talk to you. And I look forward to being able, as I said, to see you and perhaps hug you in person in the not too distant future.
We all miss that, but Chag Sameach to you, Rabbi. Thank you again for inviting me. It was an honor, and please give our best to your family as well.
We will. Thank you. Bye.
Stay healthy.